Et merci de nous rejoindre pour ce rendez-vous de webinaire. Et aujourd'hui, nous avons un séminaire en anglais sur le lac de Vannes, dont va nous parler Roberto Dan. Et sans plus attendre, please, Roberto, you may start as soon as you're ready for all of us. And we are listening to you during, I don't know, half an hour or 20 minutes, maybe more?
More or less between 20 minutes and half hour, yes.
Okay, and so you may have an exchange or some question to ask to you. We also be honored to have Marie-Claude Trémouille, who is a very great specialist on the question, and what Roberto. I would like to host also our colleague Novela Vismara, and also Mrs. Peltekian, who is a student and who is very interested in the conference. So I have to stop to talk and to let you do the conference. Please.
Perfect. Do you see the cover of the PowerPoint now? Perfect. Let's start. So, good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Marie-Claude Trémouille. She's the co-author of this presentation. Of course, Eric Raymond and all the staff of the Societas Anatolica for the opportunity to be here today. And of course, I would like to thank all the people that is attending to this event. So this presentation is based on a very simple idea, but one that I believe is methodologically crucial. Lake Van, like other environmental contexts, should not be regarded as a static backdrop, but rather as a dynamic archaeological landscape whose shape has changed significantly over time. And if the lake has changed, then our reading of coastal sites, our reconstruction of communication routes, and ultimately the historical geography of Urartu must also be changed. So the point is not simply to show a number of submerged or semi-submerged remains. The real point is another, to understand how transformation of the shoreline have altered the modern perception of the ancient landscape, and how I combined re-examination of historical maps, geomorphology, and archaeological evidence allow us to reconstruct a landscape very different from the present one. In this respect, Lake Van in the Armenian highlands of what is today Eastern Turkey represent an exemplary case. To begin with, we need to place Lake Van within the broader setting, that of the Armenian highlands. We are not dealing with a peripheral or isolated basin, but with one of the three great island lakes of the region, together with Lake Sevan and Lake Urmia. Within this system, Lake Van represents a geographical and historical node of primary importance. From a physical point of view, it is the largest soda lake in the world, situated at about 1,648 meters above sea level, with highly distinctive chemical and environmental characteristics. For our purposes today, however, what matters most is the fact that this vast basin lies at the heart of a region that was central to the formation, expansion, and territorial control of the kingdom of Bia Urartu during the first half of the first millennium BCE. In other words, every change in its morphology inevitably had repercussions on the way in which the surrounding territory was inhabited, cultivated, traversed, and politically organized. In recent years, non-systematic underwater exploration of the lake brought sensationalist headlines to the attention of the wider public, with claims about mysterious discoveries, 3,000 years old submerged castles, and lost cities re-emerging from the waters. Naturally, such headliners are very effective from a communicative point of view, but scientifically they create two problems. First, they tend to oversimplify phenomena that are in fact far more complex. Second, they risk suggesting the idea of an exceptional and isolated discovery, whereas the really matters is the broader picture. Lake Van preserves numerous traces of an ancient landscape that has been altered by rising water levels and coastal erosion. For this reason, in this presentation, I do not want to begin with the mystery, but rather with a critique of sensationalism. Underwater pictures are certainly useful, but they need to be brought back to a broader question. Why? What do they tell us about the change in the morphology of the lake and about the archaeological consequences of those changes? This slide introduces the physical framework on which the argument is based. On the one hand, we have the bathymetric map of the lake. On the other, the topographic and geomorphological map of the Van Basin, showing the quaternary lacustrine deposits and the main ancient sedimentation surfaces. The essential point is this: the present shape of the lake is neither eternal nor stable. The distribution of the deposits, the configuration of the fossil lacustrine surfaces, and the depth of the basin all suggest that the lake has gone through different phases and that its present maximum extent does not automatically correspond to its ancient one. In particular, the deepest part corresponds to the so-called Tatvan Basin, that is, the southwestern sector, whereas the other portions, especially the lower and flatter areas, appear to have been far more sensitive to fluctuations in water level. This means that not all shorelines share the same history. Some sectors, especially in the northeast and along certain low-lying coastal stretches, were much more exposed to transformation, progressive submergence, the development of marshy areas, erosion, and the retreat of the shorelines. As we shall see, this has a direct impact on the distribution of the archaeological sites. At this point, historical cartography comes into play, but it must be read diachronically. A map such as Eric Kiepert of 1884 is not important because it documents a different morphology of Lake Van. On the contrary, it is useful precisely because it shows that by the end of the 19th century, the lake had already assumed a configuration broadly similar to its present one. In this sense, Kiepert provides a late point of comparison. The question, therefore, shifts to the earlier evidence, namely older maps and travelers' accounts, which instead convey the image of a smaller and more regular lake, with particularly clear differences, above all in the northeastern sector. The methodological issue, then, is not whether Kiepert was mistaken, but whether the earlier representation, when they diverged from the modern shape of the lake, preserved the memory of an actual older morphology. It is precisely through the comparison between the earliest cartographic testimonies, the morphological data, and the archaeological evidence that the overall pictures begin to acquire coherence. The most famous piece of evidence in this respect is the map drawn by William Monteith on the basis of information provided by Friedrich Eduard Schulz. For a long time, this map has attracted considerable attention because it shows Lake Van with a shape noticeably different from the modern one, especially with regard to the well-known horn extending eastwards. For many years, it was considered unlikely that a British officer could have made such a major mistake. But in fact, the issue is not the mistake itself. The point is that if the same divergence appears elsewhere as well, then this map ceases to be an isolated anomaly and became part of a broader set of converging testimonies. In other words, the Monteith-Schulz map should not be read as an antiquarian curiosity, but as a document preserving the memory of an older geographical configuration, later erased or distorted by the evolution of the lake. It is precisely this kind of evidence that has helped to reopen the question of the extent of Lake Van in pre-modern and ancient periods. Here, the argument becomes stronger because we are not longer dealing with a single testimony, but with a series of different representations. The map by Khatib Chelebi, that of Danville, and the detail from Piquet map. Naturally, each of these images has its own limitations, its own graphic conventions, and cannot be read uncritically. What matters, however, is the recurrence of the same issue. Once again, Lake Van appears less similar to its modern form than we might expect. And when the same discrepancy recurs in several cartographic traditions, and is combined with travelers' accounts and archaeological evidence, it acquires a very strong documentary value. It is precisely this convergence that formed the core of the argument. Not a single piece of evidence, but the intersection of historical maps, travelers' observations, and geomorphology of the basin, and submerged or semi-submerged sites. This picture helps to understand why, for example, the Ershish area is so important in the broader discussion of the shoreline change at Lake Van. We are looking at how a low and unstable sector of the northeastern shore, shaped by the Bendimai River floodplain, abandoned channels and marshy areas. In addition, this landscape was influenced by the nearby Ershish fault, which further increased its fragility. In this context, the remains of Chelebi and Ershish Castle should not be seen as an isolated anomalies, but as a part of a long-term process of geomorphological and shoreline transformation. After considering the geomorphological setting of the area, we can now move directly to the archaeological evidences. The northeastern shore of Lake Van is, in fact, one of the most eloquent sectors, precisely because here environmental and historical transformation are intertwined in particularly clear way. In this slide, we can see the location of Chelebi, marked by the blue dot in the upper left part of the map, an archaeological mound with the remains of medieval cemetery, and above all, that of Ershish Castle, indicated by a blue dot in the lower right of the upper image, together with a well-known 16th century miniature depicting the castle and its surrounding area. This documentation shows clearly that the issue does not arise solely from modern observation or satellite pictures. Already in the pre-modern period, the area appears to have been characterized by amphibious conditions, marshy zones, and structure close to the water or already partly affected by its advance. In other words, we are not dealing only with the sites that are today submerged or semi-submerged, but with a long-term process that was also perceived in the historical sources. The miniature, of course, should not be read as a topographical survey in strict sense, but rather as a visual document reflecting a landscape that had already been transformed. And this fits very well with the written testimonies concerning the progressive advance of the water in the Ershish region. Ershish is one of the most striking cases. Today, medieval masonry can still be seen emerging from the water, but the historical sources tell a much broader story, that of an important town progressively abandoned because of the rise of the lake. Lynch's descriptions are especially eloquent. Writing in the 19th century, he recalls that between 1838 and 1841, the level of the lake rose by about 10 to 12 feet, causing the collapse of foundation and the loss of freshwater resources, eventually leading to the evacuation of the settlement. Sinclair, likewise, reports that parts of the town had by then disappeared beneath the water and that the settlement had shifted from its original location. Perhaps the most interesting point, however, is that around Ershish there has also survived a local tradition according to which the peasant lake covered an ancient fertile plain, crossed by watercourses and even by a bridge now submerged. Even if part of this account is clearly legendary in character, taken as a whole, it preserves a historical memory of the advance of the waters, one that fits perfectly with the geomorphological and archaeological evidence. Two particularly instructive cases may now be considered. The first is Delichai, where the semi-submerged wall were once interpreted as a pier or even as an Urartian harbor. The second one is Dilkaya, along the delta of the Hoshap River, where erosion along the lakeshore has destroyed an important part of the site. In the case of Delishai, we are still in the northeastern part of this Lake Van, the point is quite clear. The interpretation as a pier or Urartian landing place is weak because it presupposes a higher lake level in the Urartian period, whereas the overall body of evidence points in the opposite direction, namely toward the lower one. The walls now submerged should therefore be understood much more plausibly as fortification structure later affected by the subsequent rise of the lake. Moreover, the context of the rock inscription of Sarduri II at Karatash, close to Delishai, with a reference to the valley and to the vineyard of Sarduri, even suggests that productive and cultivated areas may today lie beneath the water, especially in the northeastern sector. Dilkaya, for its part, illustrates another aspect of the same phenomenon, not only submergence, but also active coastal erosion, capable of literally eating away the western edge of the mound and dispersing archaeological material down the slope. Once again, therefore, the lake is not simply a container of submerged sites, but a geomorphological agent that alters, destroys, and redefines archaeological contexts. Bellerin Calesi or Bellerin Fortress provide a further point of focus in the discussion of coastal and pericoastal sites. Even where the chronological documentation is not uniform or perfectly defined, what matters for the present argument is the recurrence of the same general configuration. Archaeological remains now lying close to the water, deformed by erosion, isolated or partly absorbed into the modern lakeside landscape. The site, regarded as Urartian, has also given rise to the interpretation of the staircase as evidence of an Urartian period pier. In this case, however, the same consideration just made for Delishai also can be applied. The purpose of this slide is therefore above all argumentative, to emphasize that we are not dealing with one or two exceptional cases, but with a whole constellation of evidence that compels us to rethink the history of the lake's shore. More recently, in 2024, media attention focused on a new semi-submerged site along the western shore of Lake Van, in fact already identified by the present speaker together with Marie-Claude Trémouille during the preparation of the contribution published on this topic in 2022. In this slide, the comparison between the 2017 satellite image and the aerial views shows quite clearly an archaeological area located 2.2 kilometers east of Beştaş and 1.2 kilometers northwest of Adabag, on the low promontory or peninsula now largely surrounded by the waters. What can be identified is not an isolated monument, but a concentration of rectangular structures distributed over an area of about 155 by 105 meters, that is almost 1 hectare. The visible anomalies seem to correspond to adjoining or clustered units with regular room generally measuring between about 5 and 10 meters per side. It is precisely this planimetric organization that makes the site particularly interesting, even though, on the basis of the images alone, it is not possible to propose a secure date. The most important point, however, is topographical. The site appears to occupy a tongue of land that was once connected with the mainland, whereas today the lake isolates much of its perimeter. In this sense, the case is entirely consistent with the hypothesis of an ancient shoreline very different from the present one. Its importance, therefore, lies not so much in any immediate chronological attribution, but in the fact that it adds a further element to reconstruction of the ancient landscape. Not everything that is submerged is automatically Urartian, but everything that is submerged or semi-submerged may be crucial for understanding the historical transformation of the lake shores. A further aerial picture of this newly identified site is also shown here. It should certainly not be described as a city, rather it appears to have been a small settlement. In the picture, a road or track leading to the inhabited area can be made out, together with a rather irregular and apparently unplanned distribution of the buildings. This seemingly chaotic layout may suggest that the settlement did not result from a centralized urban design, but rather developed in a less formal and more organic way. Adigevasi is a particularly important case. The present fortress stands at the southwestern edge of the modern town, and earlier studies had already pointed to the significance of the site. More recent underwater investigation, however, have identified completely submerged structural remains of different periods at a distance of about 300 meters from the rocky spur of the fortress. Historical sources are especially helpful in interpreting this situation. Hulin had already observed that a wall later than the Urartian period descended toward the shore and even entered the lake, clearly implying a relative rise in the water level after its construction. Sinclair, for his part, described Adigevas as an ancient town that had been progressively drowned, with its southern quarters submerged and the settlement shifting repeatedly from its original position. Adigevas, therefore, is not simply a site with remains underwater. It is a case of a historical town in gradual displacement, forced to move more than once in response to the transformation of the lakeshore. The picture also shows the well-known Adigevas relief, a 7th century Urartian monument dating to the reign of Rusa, son of Argishti. It originally came from the nearby site of Kefkarisi, but was later cut out and transferred to the medieval fortress. This circumstance has contributed to an incorrect interpretation of the submerged remains, which have often been too readily attributed to the Urartian period. The underwater picture clearly shows that the submerged remains belongs to more than one building phase. Some walls seem to incorporate a probable reused Urartian block, but the masonry techniques are not uniform. Alongside dry-stone structures, there are also walls built with mortar, which point rather to medieval phases. This interpretation is consistent with the broader archaeological context, since the area has also yielded Ottoman funerary stele and Armenian kachkars. What emerges, therefore, is not a single monumental complex of one period, but a stratified, built landscape formed over time. The importance of these remains lies precisely in this complexity. They show that the rise of the lake submerged structures belonging to different historical places, and that the underwater context at Adigevas must be read as a result of a long process of occupation, reuse, and progressive submergence. The following pictures are especially important because they show a large number of Ottoman inscriptions, clearly pointing to the presence of a submerged cemetery. In this case, therefore, the issue is not the attribution of the remains to a single monumental complex, but the recognition of a funerary area now partially lost beneath the water of the lake. This evidence is particularly significant because it confirms that the submerged context of Adigevas includes not only architectural remains, but also later burial areas, further illustrating the long-term transformation of the shoreline and the progressive encroachment of the lake onto the historical settlement. Again, the underwater pictures clearly show the submerged remains that belongs more than one building phase. Some walls seem to incorporate probably reused Urartian blocks, but the masonry technique are not uniform. Alongside dry-stone structure, there are also walls built with mortar, which point rather to a medieval phase. This interpretation is consistent with the broader archaeological context, since the area has also yielded many different kinds of architectural stuff. In some cases, the visible displacement in the masonry may also be consistent with structural deformation caused by seismic activity, although this cannot be established with certainty on the basis of the picture alone. At this point, we can move on the historical implication of what has been discussed so far. If Lake Van had a different shape in antiquity from the one it has today, then the last way in which we reconstruct the connection between Tushpa and the West must also change. This last part, therefore, does not introduce a new subject, but develop the previous one. The lake as a dynamic landscape directly affected movement, logistic, and Urartian territorial control. On the basis of topographical analysis and the distribution of sites, it is possible to reconstruct three major routes between Van and the Euphrates region, not as isolated routes, but as part of a coherent network of movement and control. The picture also includes the features along the westward stretch of the Van that Velisevin, a Turkish archaeologist, has defined as a Urartian road, although it is quite clear that it is not in fact a Urartian road, but it's later in date. The first route is perhaps the most significant from an interpretative point of view because it is the one that depends most closely on the reconstruction of the ancient morphology of the lake. In essence, this route is based on the idea that the northeastern margin of the Lake Van was less extensive in antiquity than it is today, thus making possible a terrestrial corridor that has now disappeared or been heavily transformed. The route begins in Tushpa, the Urartian capital, passes through Kalejik, Garibin Tepe, and Dayanis, and then continues toward Aklat, Tadvankan, Kurtaran Tepe, Palu, and finally Malatya. Most importantly, along this line, there is a genuine chain of fortified sites and control points. Route 1, therefore, shows very clearly that the reconstruction of the Urartian routes changes radically once the paleogeography of the lake is taken into account. The second route follows a more northerly logic and is less dependent on the reconstruction of the ancient lake. It is a longer route, but also one that is very dense in terms of control sites. After Tushpa and Kalejik, the route crosses a strongly structured belt with sites such as Delijai, Zernaki Tepe, Kochapinar, Arnavur Tepe, Kayeri Dere, and other nodes that accompany the movement westward before reconnecting with the main corridor leading to Palu and then to Malatya. This route shows clearly that Urartu did not rely on a single axis to maintain its connection with the West, but rather on a network of parallel and complementary routes. Route 2 thus reflects the strength and strategic redundancy of the system. The third route is the southern one. It is also the shortest. From Tushpa, it passes through Kitskalesi and Ishetkale, then follows the southern shore of the lake toward Tatvan, and from there continues northwestwards until it reconnects with the system leading toward the Murat and Euphrates rivers. It is a particularly interesting route because in some stretches it is difficult to trace clearly today. Yet this very difficult way may depend on the fact that part of the coastal or subcoastal route was altered by the rise of the lake. Route 3, therefore, is not a weak hypothesis, but a plausible reconstruction of a more direct alternative route, one that completes the picture of the connection between Urartian capital and the western frontier. Before to conclude, if you are interested in exploring these issues further, Marie-Claude and I published in East and West in 2022 a contribution in which we discuss both the cartographic and the archaeological evidence. In the picture, you may see the journal and the title of this paper. In conclusion, we may therefore conclude with the three observations. The first one, there was not a single road between Tushpa and the Euphrates, but rather a system of complementary routes. Second, this system becomes intelligible only if Lake Van is interpreted as a dynamic landscape rather than as a static element. Third, the combination of geomorphology, landscape archaeology, and spatial analysis allow us to understand more clearly the territorial functioning of Urartu. In this sense, Lake Van was not merely a natural backdrop, but an active factor in the construction of the political geography of the kingdom. Thank you very much for your kind attention. So if there is any question.
Many thanks for this really interesting conference and the surprise in the beginning with the monster of the Lake of Van. I'm quite sure that anyone has many questions or maybe some remarks. Maybe Marie-Claude would like speaking.
Donc, pas de question.
No question, yes. Oui, tu connais déjà tout ça, mais peut-être des ajouts ou des...
Une chose que l'on peut dire, par exemple, vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Oui.
Oh, oui, très bien.
Pour le changement, par exemple, l'élimination de la corne, hein, jusqu'à un niveau très très bas, dans les cartes jusqu'en 1839, cette corne n'existe pas. À partir de 1840-1841, apparemment, elle commence à apparaître. La raison pourrait en être un tremblement de terre. On sait on a des études qui ont été faites, il y a eu ce qu'on appelait un méga-séisme qui a duré pendant plus de 4 mois et qui a certainement, justement, à cause des deux plaques qui se retrouvent, qui ont une action verticale et horizontale en même temps, qui ont provoqué probablement justement cette transformation des niveaux de terrain et donc ont permis, disons, l'élimination de l'eau et qui ont formé cette corne. Ça pourrait être enfin, je ne sais pas, c'est très probablement une des causes, une seule. Il y en a d'autres certainement.
Intéressant. Intéressant détail. Novella, maybe? Non?
Non, mais pardonnez-moi. Merci, non, tout a été vraiment très intéressant.
Thank you. Thank you very
Bon,
much.
alors, peut-être également monsieur ou madame Peltekian, non?
Allô,
oui.
Oui.
Allô, oui.
On m'entend?
Oui, allez-y, monsieur.
Oui, test, bon, juste je vérifie. D'accord, très bien. D'abord, merci beaucoup pour la présentation, en français ou en anglais à propos.
Peut-être en anglais pour Roberto, ce sera mieux, mais non, mais sinon français pour nous, c'est
If it
bien.
is a direct question to me, I prefer in English, to tell the truth. Of course, I can understand French, but I scared that I could lose something. So
We may translate
Okay,
if it's necessary.
Okay,
I'll try to.
We'll mix. We'll do like the Lebanese person, for Lebanese person. So thank you very much for the presentation first. Pretty interesting, let's say. First, I mean, not question or more like parallels. The thing is that like Lake Sevan has, if I remember correctly, also had some changes in the level. Like I remember that it be, for example, before the Soviet era, you know, that there was at a certain level, and during the Soviet era, the level reduced. But with that, I mean, thanks to this reducing level, we saw that there are other stuff in the lake, which became, let's say, which were then exposed. I think like 4,000 years, maybe something like that. Bronze Age, Bronze Age stuff were exposed. I mean, bless you. So I think if there was maybe a parallel, you know, something related in that way, given that it's really near, and again, you know, Armenia and you know.
No, I totally agree with you. There is in Seven Lake, the situation in a certain way could be considered as similar. Of course, in Van, the water changes are totally connected, according to our knowledge, to natural events. While in Seven Lake, as you probably know, the water changes was due to the construction of a canal that was connecting the lake with a southern river, I think Vorotan River in Syunik region, to increase the water of southern part of Armenia. And this reduced quite a lot the level of Seven Lake. There are some very beautiful pictures of some archaeologists that before the Soviet era were reaching an Urartian inscription in Sominar Fortress on the southern shore of Seven Lake with a boat, with a ship, while now all these lands are totally emerged from the ground. So yes, the lowering of the level of the lake brought to the light a lot of very interesting archaeological stuff, especially, let me say, the very huge protohistoric cemetery in Le Chachenne that is located on the northwestern part of the lake, where this very famous bronze age wooden chart were found during the excavation of the graves. So these are, we can compare, of course, but as I told you, the changes in the water level in Semaleka, it's only in this moment was done by human intervention, let me say. While in Van, the process is at the moment at least completely natural, let me say.
That the modern one was done by human intervention, but I meant
of
like
course,
the older one.
Of course, in the past, something natural happened because there was a cemetery underwater, so and many other things. Of course. And also in Urmia, unfortunately, the situation with the Urmia Lake is terrible for the water shortage due to the climate change. But also there could be some surprises, let me say. So.
Sorry. There is still an Urmia Lake right now, or is the Urmia Lake still?
I think water was almost totally disappeared in Urmia Lake due to the fact that the construction of many artificial dams that, as I know, it's something like Aral Sea. I mean, it's almost totally disappeared, unfortunately.
I see. Okay, thank you. And question à Madame Trémouille, si je puis me permettre. Concernant, vous avez mentionné justement le tremblement de terre qui a eu lieu en 1839, ce qui, on va dire, un petit peu m'étonne parce que, bon, pour moi, le lac de Vannes avec sa petite corne, c'était quelque chose comme imprimé dans mon inconscient, vous savez. C'est comme la petite corne du lac Léman. Donc, quand on me dit qu'il y a 200 ans, cette corne n'existait pas, et que personne n'en parle, 1839, c'est pas si loin. C'est-à-dire, on aurait pensé qu'il y aurait des gens qui auraient écrit qu'une telle chose s'est passée, qu'il y a une corne qui a soudainement émergé. Vous voyez, est-ce que pour ce tremblement de terre, est-ce qu'il y a des traces? En particulier, je pense, là maintenant que je parle, sur on va dire, sur le passage, sur le tracé des fleuves, qui a probablement dû changer d'une manière très considérable. Si ça après c'est totalement changé la disposition d'un lac, donc je pense que les fleuves comme l'Euphrate qui a sa source dans cette région, a totalement dû tout bouleverser.
Le seul fleuve qui existe vraiment, enfin une rivière, c'est le Badimaï, et en réalité le niveau est très très bas, donc c'est une forme des méandres continuellement. Mais disons, la preuve que la corne n'existait pas avant, ce sont toutes les cartes, jusqu'en 1829, les cartes présentent le lac sans cette corne. Et en plus, le niveau, la profondeur, je crois que c'est 50 mètres, n'est-ce pas, Roberto? Sono 50 metri, vero, la profondità del corno, mi sembra.
Yes, the maximum level of the depth of the lake on the northwest part is not more than 50 meters. And so...
C'est rien.
Yeah, of course.
Mais c'était genre, on va dire, il n'y avait pas cette partie depuis, on va dire, le début, entre guillemets, ou bien on va dire que ça... Il y avait un moment où il y avait cette corne. Non, le truc, c'est que je demande donc cette question encore parce que pour moi, c'est vraiment très bizarre que la corne soit quelque chose d'ultra récent encore. Donc, j'ai du mal à m'imaginer que ce soit...
Oui, récent, maintenant, ça fait 200 ans. Mais disons que si vous prenez les cartes du Moyen-Âge, vous prenez toutes les cartes de 1600, 1700, vous prenez celles qui, justement, Schulz, on est en 1829, il n'y a pas de cornes. Toutes les cartes que nous avons vues, présentées, analysées, il n'y a pas les cornes. On a même les itinéraires autour du lac et il n'y a rien qui va de ce côté-là.
Même dans les, on va dire, manuscrits médiévaux arméniens.
Oui, Roberto,
manuscripto armeniano, bon, dans les manuscrits arméniens, in the Armenian manuscripts.
puoi mettere la carta
Yes.
che ci aveva mandato il professore armeno.
Sì, sì. Let me share.
Et quand on met la carte aussi, there's another point I want to ask also on the map before.
Tiens, là c'est ça. Alors, c'est une,
Oui.
attention, c'est une carte, donc c'est une carte antique. Il faut penser qu'il faut elle n'est pas dans la direction normale. Il faut que vous la tourniez de 90 degrés.
Hein?
Mais vous voyez bien. Et donc, il y a toutes autour, il y a les noms des localités. Et ça, c'est une carte médiévale, c'est une carte arménienne.
Mais où sont donc passés les villages qui étaient là-bas avant?
Mais certains, vous voyez, ils ne sont pas sur le bord. Ceux-là, ils existent.
Non,
maintenant, ils sont au bord du lac.
Non, pas ceux qui sont maintenant au bord du lac, mais ceux qui sont maintenant au-dessous du lac. Il n'y a aucun on va dire, un témoignage anthropologique qu'il y a une catastrophe qui a englouti les villages sous l'eau, de ce point de vue, je veux dire.
Mais ça s'est fait au cours de millénaires. De l'époque, ça a certainement commencé.
Pour le 1829. Pardon?
Pardon?
Pardon. Non, je veux dire pour la partie qui a été submergée récemment, 1829.
Justement, c'est certainement une région où c'était une vallée. Alors, il est possible qu'il n'y ait pas eu de village dans la vallée. Hein? C'était une vallée.
D'accord. C'est toujours un petit peu...
Les textes nous parlent souvent pour cette région-là de la vallée de Sardouri. C'est probablement, justement, c'était une vallée qui appartenait à la famille, peut-être, du roi.
De la vallée,
de sa tribu.
Sardouille. Désolé, j'ai pas entendu la tribu de nom.
Sardouri.
Ah, Sardouri, d'accord. Oui. Et si on revient un petit peu sur en avant, il y a quelques slides en avant. Some slides after, please.
After or before?
Yes.
Avant,
non, avant, encore. We can't again.
Ça, c'est une carte.
At the end, yes. No, at the end, I mean, at the end. Yes, more at the end, there was that comparison between, again, before, yeah, here.
This,
yes.
Or
No.
this.
After. No, after. Sorry. Here. Yes. I see that. So I guess to Roberto, to Dr. Dan again. Here there is like a part that got emptied. Like on the older part, it was full. Then on the southeast.
You mean on the southwest or on the southeast?
Southeast. So in southeast, there is one part that slightly got emptied. I mean, you know, the blue part.
Emptied by archaeological sites or?
No. No, I mean, in the southeast in the lower map, in the southeast, there is one little blue part that in the upper map, it's not there anymore.
No. This is a probably problem with the GIS program that we have used for doing this reconstruction. You cannot take these maps from a geological perspective. I mean, so this could be a mistake of the model, let me say. But it's, no, you don't. In general, the shape of the lake is correct, but we are going to correct these maps for this kind of small details.
Okay. So we can't do like core. We can do a core to see if, and it's geologically speaking, we have like some proofs that it was underwater.
For sure, the southern part of the Lake Van was one of the less affected by the change of the level. I mean, because it's all there are all mountains there. but it is possible that also there underwater there could be some sites that are now submerged that will let us in future to reconstruct also completely this southern route. But for the moment, this is also the area of Lake Van that was less explored by archaeological expeditions, especially because it's a very mountainous part of the Van Lake.
And dangerous?
I don't want to say that. I have been there. I didn't had the feeling of any danger. Just I think now there are a lot of archaeological expeditions, mainly Turkish, that are working in Van region. But I must say that what is missing is a general perspective on such kind of activities. So there are still areas of Van region that are not so well explored, and the southern shore is for sure one of them. It would be very important and interesting to have some archaeological activities there because it's very promising area. Let me say.
I mean, I will follow this those research with interest because it's really interesting in this point of view how that big evolution. So as I was thinking right now I asked myself the salinity of the water. So it must have been even saltier before than now. If
to tell the truth, we didn't have any. We didn't thought about the question of the salinity, but it would be interesting to see if there are some, because there were a lot of geological studies, of course, on Lake Van, and to deepen the knowledge about such kind of problem, about salinity. I mean, that of course it's something that have a big impact on many activities and the use of the lake. Let me say so. Thank you for this remark. It's something on which we have to spend some time.
Oh no, thank you for your presentation. I mean, and
let me say our presentation. I spoke, but all the things that you are looking is the results of our joint work and contribution with Marie-Claude. So,
okay. And Alexander Solcha has questions. I mean, he just came.
Alors, Alexandre, tu nous mettais des messages dans la conversation, mais tu peux intervenir si tu le souhaites. Ah, peut-être, je ne sais pas s'il nous entend. Donc, Alexandre, ton micro est éteint. Oui, vas-y.
Oui, excusez-moi, je ne voulais pas interrompre un si brillant exposé. D'ailleurs, je suis désolé parce que malheureusement, j'ai une longue journée, donc j'ai dû un peu me reposer avant de venir. Donc malheureusement, j'ai raté un petit peu l'exposé lui-même. Mais par contre, j'ai voulu soumettre une question qui, à mon avis, est intéressante, c'est-à-dire la comparaison des campagnes assyriennes autour du lac Van, et notamment le récit de Shalmaneser, et la question de la géographie urartéenne. Voilà. Alors, j'en parle parce que j'ai un joli volume que j'avais sauvé à l'époque de Moscou, puisque le département voulait partir, et donc ils avaient laissé les livres dans le corridor en disant que ceux qui étaient intéressés pouvaient les prendre. Et c'était les volumes très bien faits de l'Académie allemande concernant les campagnes assyriennes, notamment de Shalmaneser et le reste. D'accord. Donc moi, j'ai tout pris. Bon. Et ça m'intéresse sur 3 points de vue. Le premier, l'aspect linguistique entre les toponymes assyriens et ceux qu'on pourrait trouver en Urartu. Ça, c'est point numéro 1. Deuxième, c'est-à-dire la toponymie que vous avez faite, qui, à mon avis, est très bonne, mais qui pourrait être complétée par d'autres sources en lien avec ce genre de campagne militaire et le reste. Donc ça, c'est 2. Puis troisième, un travail de plus longue envergure, ça ne veut pas dire qu'il n'a pas été fait. C'est plutôt une étude comparative, mais donc la comparaison entre des toponymes actuels, les toponymes que l'on trouve sur des cartes, notamment médiévales, les possibles, parce que sauf erreur, il n'y en a pas beaucoup, mais quand même les possibles toponymes latins qui pourraient être de cette région-là, Et puis, évidemment, ce qu'on trouve côté assyrien et Urartu. Voilà. Donc, c'est le petit fruit de ma réflexion.
Alexandre, could you summarize your questions, your 3 questions in English, please, for Roberto? It's easier to him because your questions are a bit long, and so it's not so easy to answer properly.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So I will summarize. So the first one is about the idea of putting together the aspects of Assyrian campaigns, like the one of Shalmaneser, and the Urartian geography in a whole. That's point number 1. Point number 2, you presented very good toponyms of all the Urartu region. My question will be, is it possible to check more precisely every aspect of the Assyrian locations related to Urartu, and then check with the Urartian elements and the documentation we have, and see if we can develop a toponymy on it. And finally, we spoke of ancient cards, yes, maps to be precise. So is there a possibility to provide connections between those medieval maps, aspects of Latin Roman Empire region around Urartu, and the Urartian locations we would be able to already know? Well, that's basically it.
Okay, thank you very much for all these very interesting and let me say also complicated questions. So no, it's of course it's very interesting. We are dealing with many of these aspects with Marie-Claude in these months, in these years. Let me say, we are often working about historical geography because all this stuff are connected with historical geography, with toponyms, with the relations between Urartu and Assyria. It is everything is always very stimulating and also, let me say, Marie-Claude, complex. Of course, I think from toponyms point of view, from toponomastical point of view, a lot of work was done in the last years. Several toponyms were reconnected with Urartian, for example, and Assyrians were connected also with some medieval toponyms and so on. Of course, most of the work must be done, but we need more documents, let me say, more written documents and documents in situ to deepen our knowledge of the historical geography of these regions. This is, of course, this problem is connected also with the route of used by the Assyrians to cross the Urartian territory. Of course, we must take into account that most of the reports of the Assyrians are, let me say, propaganda. So we don't know exactly how many times the Assyrians were able to enter in Urartu, to cross it. And of course, let me say, the organization of the Urartian kingdom was very different from the Assyrian ones. There was not a real territorial control from a military perspective. I mean, the Assyrians had the opportunity to cross the Urartian country without finding big resistance, because the Urartian army was very different from the Assyrian one. They weren't able to fight against the Assyrians and to block them on an open field. When they did it, for example, in the famous Kishtan and Alpi clash of 743 BC, Urartu had a big loss in that clash, because they tried to fight against Assyrian on the favorite ground, so an open battlefield. Urartu, of course, the territory of Urartu was, of course, let me say, crossable by the Assyrian army, but we don't know how many times and how long were these expeditions, even because we must take into account the weather condition. I mean, the territory of Urartu is very harsh. It's harsh today and was harsh, of course, before in the first millennium BC. So we must take all this Assyrian report with a bit of care, and I hope that in future the discovery of more documents will let us to fix more point in the reconstruction of the historical geography, and of course also of the route and the itineraries that the Assyrian did in these lands. Of course, in the territory of Urartu, the routes are not so many, because it's not like Mesopotamia, where you can, of course, reach a place from many different locations. In Urartu, the geography, of course, provides some limits in the way in which you can reach a place. For example, to reach the Tushpa, that was the capital of Urartu, you don't have more than a couple of ways that, of course, were very well protected by Urartian fortresses. So I hope that I answered most of your questions.
Yes, thank you. You did, and it shows that I am right. This is exactly where we have to go further. So thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. We must ask to our Turkish colleague to do more archaeological surveys to increase our knowledge. I cannot hear you, Eric. I think you don't have the volume.
Yes, I have cut off the microphone. So I just ask if there are any other questions to ask to you, or any remarks about this fascinating topic. Yes.
How can we get more updated on the topic in the coming days or months or years?
Sorry, can you repeat? I didn't hear you.
How can we get updated about this topic in the coming month, year?
Of course, it is not depending only by us, of course, but on the level of the research. For example, I hope that in future in Van, a very serious program of underwater survey will be done to try to fix all these features that I showed you, but most of these materials are coming from social media, from newspaper, from for the moment, as I know, there are just a few publications, scientific publications, I mean, that are facing such kind of situation. One is, of course, our between me and Marie-Claude, but I hope there will be some underwater exploration that will help us to understand how different was the land at the time of the Urartian. For example, we were many times discussing with Marie-Claude about the old extent of the Van Plain, where was located the capital of Urartu. Now it's a very small plain in comparison with other areas, but with the lower level that was for sure in the Urartian time, the land was, that can be used for cultivation, for agriculture, was for sure much bigger, and we are quite sure that there must be also some more fortification that were protecting Van, maybe still totally unknown and still totally underwater. In any case, in these last years or months, let me say, the water level of Van Lake is going down very, very quickly. So that is, of course, an ecological problem from a side, and from another side, a very interesting, let me say, archaeological opportunity. So we will see what will happen. The situation is changing quite fast, let me say.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Okay, so thank you again.
You're welcome.
And I hope we'll keep in touch.
With pleasure.
Still, for me, still fascinating for the horn part, is still mind-blowing for me.
Sorry, which one?
The horn part is still mind-blowing for me. So.
There must be a lot of interesting stuff underwater because we are quite sure about the fact that an ancient road, not of course exploited only by Urartians, but all the other from in Orontid period, Achaemenid, in Roman period, there must be something very interesting there. Let me say, we will see if
also, also
Please.
the thing is that also that place, like Van and around, was during the medieval time at least one of the most important like mini kingdoms, the Vaspurakan kingdom that
Vaspurakan,
let's
yes,
say
Vaspurakan region.
yes,
Yeah.
it was one of the most strong kingdom because it resisted for a long time. So they must have had the means to resist so long. So I guess again this can raise the question that maybe the topography was pretty different that allowed them to have the means and the food and all of those to be able to resist.
Of course.
And now that I'm thinking about also now I'm thinking about something else. I mean, I remembered something else that you'll excuse me again, but I just had this little. I think that let's say the Armenians of Cilicia that came during the Middle Ages, so around 1000, they were again from that region. So there must have been a pretty massive amount of, a good amount of people to be able to come from Vaspurakan to Cilicia and make kingdom there. So again, it's like the sheer amount of people that must have lived there that were able to demographically wait on the foundation of an Armenian kingdom somewhere else, taking into account that displacement must probably have removed a lot of people. So thinking that again that the place must have been pretty wide to accommodate a lot of people there before they went to the Mediterranean shore and all. Again,
there were a lot of Armenian settlement and very important centers there. For example, in the picture that I shown in the beginning and at the end of our presentation, there is beautiful pictures of Akhtamar Island. That is a very small island that is hosting the remnants of a very impressive and beautiful Armenian monastery. Yeah. But in the Armenian records from the Middle Age, now I don't remember the author, maybe Anania of Shirak, I don't remember. I don't remember. It was written that on the Akhtamar Island there was a city and a very big settlement that it's clearly still underwater. So the picture, if the situation with the water level will continue in this way, it will be enriched a lot in the next years. For example, just a few weeks ago, a new, totally unknown Armenian cemetery came out from the water of the Van Lake with a very beautiful Kachkar of a type that is very typical for Armenians in Van region, that it's quite different from, for example, from the Kachkars from the Sevan, from modern Armenian region. So situation is really in progress, let me say.
And which universities, who is founding or who are founding the research,
Our research, you mean?
And in general, yes.
Yeah, me and Marie-Claude, we are affiliated with ISMEO, that is an important, one of the most important research institution in Italy now. So this research was not founded at all. It's just our own research by me and Marie-Claude, but in general, our activities, because we are working with archaeological excavation in Armenia, Georgia, and starting from this year also in the Republic of Moldova, are founded by ISMEO and usually by Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italian Republic. So these are our most common sources. So
interesting. Okay, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Micro.
Micro.
Eric, we cannot hear you. The microphone is off.
Sorry. Bien, je ne sais pas s'il y a encore d'autres interventions. J'ai vu que Luc Huitenhoff nous avait rejoint, mais n'a peut-être pas pu suivre le début de la conférence, donc je ne sais pas s'il souhaite intervenir, mais il le peut. Est-ce que vous avez d'autres éléments?
Il y a encore monsieur
Oui,
Alexandre.
Oui, pardon?
Non, il y avait Alexandre qui avait posté sur le chat.
Oui,
sur,
alors je pense que c'était pour nous saluer parce qu'il devait nous quitter, je pense. Voilà, mais bah, en tout cas, on était, je pense, ravis de nous retrouver tous et puis également d'avoir un invité très savant comme vous, donc du Liban, c'est ça?
oui, du
Très
Liban,
bien.
et arménien du Liban.
Ah,
Nous
arménien
aussi.
du Liban. Et donc
Naturel,
actuellement, vous vous connectez depuis Beyrouth ou?
on va dire à peu près, oui, c'est un peu plus au nord, on va dire, aux alentours du Nahr el-Kalb, là où il y a les inscriptions, la vallée où il y a les inscriptions, on va dire.
Très
C'est à
bien.
peu près là-bas. Donc, on n'entend pas trop les bombardements. On entend les bombardements, mais on ne les voit pas. Mais on les entend bien.
Oui, j'imagine. En tout cas, et vous avez eu l'information pour le webinaire par le site ou
si je me souviens bien, c'était la newsletter ça s'appelait comment déjà? C'était la newsletter pour tout ce qui était archéologie du Proche-Orient, de l'Inde. Oh, j'ai oublié le nom. C'était une newsletter.
Du Wolfson College ou?
Non. Attendez, je vais vous le dire maintenant.
C'est intéressant de savoir si on est relayé.
Oh, oui,
C'est très bien.
Je pense que oui. Alors, je l'ai archivé. C'était là. Vous m'excuserez. Oh.
Mais en tout cas,
le nom de la newsletter est Caravansérie. Et c'était Caravansérie. Voilà. Actualité de la recherche. Actualité de la recherche du Maghreb à l'Indus. Et c'est en général toutes les semaines, ils envoient une newsletter pour, on va dire, informer sur ce qu'il y a comme séminaire, l'agenda de la recherche, ou bien les appels à écrire, on va dire, des articles. Oui.
Bah, écoutez,
par exemple, ici, voilà.
En tout cas, si vous voulez suivre nos actualités, ben, sur societasanatolica.org, on essaye de mettre les manifestations scientifiques. N'hésitez pas à nous contacter par mail si vous voulez être dans notre petite newsletter. Alors que, bon, là, il y en a une qui est passée avec quelques erreurs de latin, malheureusement. Mais bon. Et puis même, vous pouvez, si vous le souhaitez, nous rejoindre et adhérer à l'association. Vous êtes le bienvenu, puisqu'on a un caractère, on n'est pas très nombreux, mais nous sommes répartis un peu j'allais dire en Europe et au Proche-Orient, mais parfois c'est même plus loin. Donc, dans l'histoire de la Societas Anatolica, on a eu des membres américains, israéliens, alors libanais, je ne crois pas encore, des Turcs, effectivement, parce qu'on a une amitié avec le TB depuis très longtemps. Et puis toute l'Europe, Marie-Claude et Novella sont en Italie, Roberto également, donc l'Italie est bien représentée, Alexandre à Moscou, et nous avions Luc pour la Belgique, et moi-même la France. Voilà, je suis en minorité, vous voyez.
En même temps, puis qu'on dit Liban, c'est un Arménien du Liban en même temps. Donc,
oui, et puis on aime beaucoup, effectivement, l'Arménie, ça fait rêver, de toute façon, l'Urartu cher à Marie-Claude et à Roberto. Donc, voilà.
Mais c'est intéressant, on va dire. Mais il n'y a personne d'Arménie. Il n'y a personne qui adhère de l'Arménie, on va dire.
Et non, je ne pense pas que nous ayons, alors peut-être dans les anciens membres, mais actuellement, je ne pense pas que nous ayons. je réfléchis, mais de membres arméniens, mais on est prêt. Dans les nouveaux adhérents, on a des adhérents portugais, hittitologues, mais on n'a pas encore de membres arméniens actifs. Donc, à bon entendeur, ça peut être vous-même ou vos collègues. Voilà.
J'ai bien des noms en tête qui ça pourrait intéresser, même s'il y a une personne qui est un très bon encore wardologue, mais bon, on va dire Union soviétique oblige, il a pris allemand au lieu d'anglais à l'époque.
Mais on peut s'efforcer d'écouter effectivement des conférences en allemand. On accepte. Alors, c'est plus difficile pour certains d'entre nous de suivre le turc, par exemple, mais les langues européennes, le français naturellement, l'anglais, l'allemand ou l'italien, bien sûr, sont les bienvenus. Et j'en profite pour dire que nous sommes en train d'organiser un colloque transversal alors, qui devrait avoir lieu à Paris normalement, on verra, mais et j'espère avec des moyens distanciels pour ceux qui ne pourront pas nous rejoindre physiquement, pour le mois de mai 2027, sur des perspectives géographiques. Donc, c'est un colloque très large. Je crois que Roberto a donné également, Roberto et Marie-Claude Novella participent, ainsi que Alexandre qui nous a, et moi-même, plus d'autres pour l'instant, et c'est ouvert, le programme n'est pas arrêté. Ce sera 21-22 mai 2027, et c'est un colloque particulier que nous essayons de mener à bien, puisque ce serait le 10e colloque In Memoriam Louis Delaporte et Eugène Cavaignac, que notre fondateur, le professeur René Lebrun, collègue de Marie-Claude estimé, avait fondé en 2000. Et nous publierons les actes dans notre partenaire historique qui est la revue Res Antiqua. Et les actes seront dédiés à notre collègue Didier Laroche, qui fêtera ses 70 printemps, un genou, l'année prochaine. Voilà.
L'acte est dans l'acte, c'est-à-dire la conférence en 2027.
2027. Alors, les actes, c'est les proceedings, les actes du colloque. Oui. Il y aura plusieurs conférences sur 2 jours. En tout cas, c'est ce qui est prévu. Et pour l'instant, on admet aussi call for paper. Hein. On est en appel à contribution. Outre les personnes que j'ai citées, on a le professeur Argune Lafleu qui m'a déjà envoyé son abstract. Les autres, dont moi, n'ont donné qu'un titre. Et également Didier Laroche, qui ne sait pas que les actes lui seront dédiés, mais sera présent pour une communication également. Voilà, mais si vous-même vous souhaitez nous proposer une communication et que vous veniez à Paris ou que ce soit en distanciel, on essaiera de faire du distanciel aussi. On l'avait fait avec nos collègues russes il y a 4 ans. Oui, allez-y.
La date butoir pour, on va dire, l'appel.
Alors, je dirais que le plus tôt est toujours le mieux, mais moi, j'avais une première échéance qui est expirée, où j'ai transmis un programme provisoire pour demander une subvention à l'État. Donc, c'était au 1er mars, mais donc, il n'y a plus de vraie date butoir, mais voilà. Mais le plus tôt est le mieux, effectivement, qu'on puisse organiser. Pour l'instant, et puisqu'on est très transparent, je n'ai pas encore de réponse sur l'institution qui nous accueillerait. Ça semble compliqué à l'Institut catholique de Paris, même si je n'ai pas de réponse définitive encore. Et j'ai sollicité la maison de la recherche à l'Université de la Sorbonne. Bon, voilà. Alors sinon, on a une solution de repli chez le professeur Trémouille en Italie, mais on va voir parce que ça peut être l'occasion de faire un 2e colloque aussi.
D'accord. Mais il y a encore du temps.
Il y a encore un peu de temps puisque c'est en mai 2027, mais ça serait bien si vous proposez un titre, moi je dirais avant l'été, ça serait bien, et puis le résumé, ça peut être plus tard.
Ou bien, au pire, on peut faire, on va dire, les conférences, c'est-à-dire avant les conférences en Turquie directement. Parce que point de vue visa, c'est pas de problème, c'est pas cher.
Alors,
en
on
plus,
a...
c'est...
Oui, alors c'est juste compliqué à organiser la Turquie, mais parce que ça prend beaucoup de temps à discuter, et puis à prendre des rendez-vous, parce que les Turcs travaillent énormément. Nos collègues turcs enfin, ils ont des emplois du temps vraiment. On se plaint en France, mais eux, c'est beaucoup. Et effectivement, on a un projet de colloque depuis 2 ans, mais qu'on a dû reporter parce qu'il devait se tenir en partie à l'IFEA. Or, l'IFEA a fermé pour travaux. Je crois qu'ils sont encore en travaux. Alors, il y a des sites provisoires, mais je n'ai pas encore vu cela. On a un projet sur alors des thématiques liées au climat, la nature, etc., dans l'Antiquité. Et c'est un colloque qui sera dédié au professeur Ali Dinçol in memoriam, qui a été notre président d'honneur, co-président d'honneur avec le recteur Valdrini. Et on doit le faire en partenariat avec le TB et l'IFEA. Et c'est un colloque de 3 jours initialement, la première journée à l'Université d'Istanbul et les 2 autres journées à l'Institut français. Mais c'est reporté pour l'instant. On co-organise avec le président délégué de la Societas Anatolica, qui est Éric Jean, et également Meltem Aparlaslan, qui est la vice-présidente du TB. Voilà.
Je suis désolée, je vais vous quitter. Hein.
Oui, je pense qu'on va se quitter d'ailleurs, et voilà, je vais d'ores et déjà arrêter peut-être le recording, et puis effectivement vous souhaiter peut-être à tous et à tous une excellente soirée, en remerciant de nouveau Roberto pour sa conférence, et puis Marie-Claude également de sa présence, ainsi que tous les participants. Merci à tous.
Bonsoir. Au revoir.
Bye.
Bonsoir.
Bye.
Bye.
Bonsoir.